Hi, thanks for joining me. First and foremost, if you're new here, welcome. My name's Jamin and I'm a third year undergraduate mathematician at the University of Oxford. Normally there's a whiteboard in the background and I do some maths on the whiteboard. That's my standard video. But today I thought I'd do something different and just talk about what it's like to do a maths interview at the University of Oxford. A lot of this will apply to Cambridge and not just maths as well, so mainly sciences, but also a lot of it will apply to humanities. So basically, if you're doing an interview at Oxford or Cambridge. Now, about 3-4 weeks ago, I made a video in which I talk about what it's like to do maths at Oxford. So if that intrigues you, I'll leave a link for that in the description below. Go and watch that after you watch this one. But anyway, I'm going to stop waffling. Let's get stuck into what it's like to do an interview at the University of Oxford, specifically for maths. Okay, so just a quick disclosure from me before we get started. This is all based down to my experiences, what I had to go through when I sat the interviews, which was almost 3.5 years ago. So just take that into account when you're watching this. A lot of what I say will be facts, but a lot of things will be just based down to my experience. Also, things would have changed ever so slightly since I sat them almost 3.5 years ago. So just take that into account. But yeah, also, I don't really know how long this video is going to be. So if it is super long, I'll leave some timestamps in the description below so you can jump to certain sections of this video if you want to. Let's get stuck in. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, Oxford and Cambridge undergraduate admissions interviews take place in the December of the year before you plan on starting, or 2 years before if you're planning on taking a gap year. So for example, for me, I started my course in September/October of 2018, and I sat my interviews then in December of 2017. Okay, now how do interviews work? Well, depending on whether you've applied to Oxford or Cambridge, or whether you've applied to do maths or something else, or whatever, you may just be visiting Oxford or Cambridge for the single day and sitting all your interviews in that one day, or if it's like me, you're fortunate enough to actually go there and stay there for a few days and then be able to sit your interviews over the few days. Obviously this is pre and post COVID, but I hope at least come 2021 December, people will be allowed to come to Oxford/Cambridge to actually sit their interviews. But of course, who knows with COVID. But once COVID goes away, hopefully sooner rather than later, then things will revert back to normal and you'll get to go to Oxford or Cambridge at least for the day to sit your interviews. And what's really nice about that is even if you don't get into Oxford or Cambridge, you get to visit there, and then most of the times you actually get to kind of experience what it's like to live in student accommodation and also visit the city and other things like that, meet potential friends, potential future friends and things like that. Okay, one thing I'll mention just before I forget, in my very first interview, they actually got me to talk for a couple of minutes about a topic of my choice, and I decided to talk about L'Hopital's rule. If you've not heard of L'Hopital's rule, don't worry. It's just something in maths you can use to evaluate certain limits, but it's not taught at A-level, it's only taught at university. So I kind of just wanted to show off a bit that I knew something I'd read outside the textbook and things like that. But just be prepared to talk about a topic of your choice, of something you really, really love in your subject, because they could ask you. And this is a really, really good opportunity for you to exemplify that you're passionate about your subject and really come across as that you do maths or whatever subject you're applying for outside of the textbook, outside of the classroom. And that is pivotal, the pivotal difference between an Oxbridge student and someone who, shouldn't really be considering Oxbridge, is that they really, really love their subject, so much so that they go and study it outside the classroom. They watch YouTube videos, subscribe to JByMaths. They do other things, they read books and go to lectures and other things like that outside of the classroom, outside of the textbook, which really exemplifies that you love your subject. Okay, so before I forget, the big secret about Oxbridge interviews, and I shouldn't say secret because it's not really a secret, and I shouldn't say it's a really, really big because there are other really major things that play a part in the interview, but one thing you should really, really remember and just try to keep in your mind is that for 99% of courses at Oxford or Cambridge, you would have already sat the entrance exam for. The only one which I can think of which doesn't have that is STEP at Cambridge. So if you're planning to do maths at Cambridge, you sit the entrance exam, the STEP, after you've done the interview, so 6 months after, when you're doing your A-levels and your summer exams, that sort of stuff, that's when you sit the STEP. But for maths at Oxford, you sit the MAT, which is a month or so before you sit your interviews, and it's the same for a bunch of other courses as well. So what that means is when you go into the interview room, they already have a taste of how good you are at maths or how good you are at physics based on the entrance exam you'd sat a month ago. So they have an idea of how good you are academically. But what does that mean for the interview? Well, that means they're probably going to focus a tiny bit less on your academics and more on how you come across as a person. Now, that doesn't mean, are you smiling all the time? Are you having a good time? Are you a party animal? Are you you're doing a bunch of things on the side. Or not really. It's more about how you communicate with the interviewers. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, the people interviewing you are also going to be, or 99% likelihood, going to be the people who are tutoring you when you come to Oxford or come to Cambridge. Because if you've applied to College X and you have your interview at College X, the people interviewing you are the people who are teaching you. So you want to come across as a teachable student and somebody that they'd enjoy to teach. If they give you a hint in a problem in the interview, in a question, and you sort of dismiss it or disregard it, and you go, oh no, I'm too smart for that hint's obvious, blah, 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 they're not going to want to teach you, and that you're exemplifying that in the interview, and that's only going to make things go downhill for you. So during the interview, you want to keep in your mind that these are the people who are going to be teaching you if you get a place. So you want to come across as teachable and someone that they enjoy to teach, someone who is engaging with them, who is, when they give you a comment to help answer a problem, you're taking it on board, perhaps putting some ideas together based on their comments and using that to help you become a better mathematician. Because at the end of the day, no matter how smart you think you are going into the interview room, the people interviewing you are smarter than you, full stop. Okay, I went to a state comp school where I was, without bragging, probably one of the smartest mathematicians at the school. And then you go to Oxford and you go to the interviews and everyone in the room is as smart, if not smarter than you. And it just throws you off completely and you're not used to it. And the same thing goes when you go into the interview room. You sit in and, for the first 16, 17 years of my life, I've been the smartest person at maths in my classroom. And then all of a sudden, I'm the dumbest mathematician in the room. And it's quite tough to get used to that change, especially in a short period of time. But remember, the interviewers are smarter than you, and use them to help you, or use them to exemplify how good you are as a mathematician. Because at least when it comes to the interview, being a good mathematician doesn't mean being able to answer all the problems. It means being able to adapt to being able to solve new problems which you haven't seen yet. Okay, so what actually happens when you're in the interview room at an Oxbridge interview, I hear you ask. Now, you may think that, or you may have heard online about some rumours and some silly myths online about, the interviewers throwing a rugby ball at you or throwing an orange or something silly like that. And if you catch it, you get a place. And if you drop it, you miss and you get rejected. That is bogus. That is bizarre. Of course, that's not true. If you were applying to perhaps do a catching degree, and if you dropped it, then maybe that would kind of make sense. But you're not applying to do a catching degree. You're applying to do maths, or you're applying to do history, or whatever you're applying to do. Throwing it, whether you can catch an orange or not, is certainly not part of how good mathematician you are. What will actually happen is you'll go in, you'll sit down, and generally there'll be two interviewers, as is the case with the maths interviews. And what will happen is it will be a half an hour-ish long interview. And the very first thing they'll actually do is ask you a question which has nothing to do with maths. They might ask just how you are, or how your journey was, or something like that. And that's not a trick question, and that's not for you to try and think of a smart answer for. That's just generally for you to answer, just to perhaps kill some nerves if there are any there, and just to get you a little bit more comfortable talking to the interviewers. Because let's not forget, this is a very stressful and nervous situation for a lot of people. So don't be alarmed if they ask you something like that. They may ask you a small question about your personal statement or something like that. But at least for maths, they really don't care too much about your personal statement. They might say, oh, you went to this summer school or something. That seems interesting. Could you talk, how did you enjoy it or something like that? But they really don't care too much. They care about your mathematical ability and your teachability. How good you are at being taught. Okay, so once you've had your sentence-long discussion about, your journey there or whatever, you'll get straight into the actual maths of the interview. So there'll be two interviewers, interviewer 1 and interviewer 2. Interviewer 1 will ask you the first problem, so the first question, and interviewer 2 will take notes during this time, and it will last roughly 15 minutes, so half of the interview time. And then after that, after the first problem, they'll switch roles. So interviewer 2 will then ask you the problem, and interviewer 1 will take notes based on your performance. Okay, but what is a standard interview question? Well, there's no simple answer to that. But there is sort of kind of like a general format, I guess, of them asking problems, in the sense that they're kind of like the long map problems, or a general step problem, in the sense that they're not just here's a problem, answer it, and then they just watch you. It will be staggered, so they'll probably give you in theory what is a part A, so kind of a simple warm-up problem. So they might just ask you to evaluate an integral, or solve an equation or sketch a graph or something which hopefully isn't too difficult. You might need a hand from the interviewers, and they're there to help you if you get stuck or anything, and they'll prod you in the right direction if they think you're going off path. But they'll generally the first problem will be, or the first part, the part A, will be something that's kind of straightforward, but it will have to help you in later parts. And that's the same with the long questions in math and the problems in STEP. Part A is generally quite easy and quite straightforward, but then usually the solution to part A is going to help you, or that sort of the thought process you had to do to solve part A is going to apply to later parts. Okay, another big tip from me for the interview is make sure you're thinking out loud. If they ask you a problem, you don't have to say something exactly straight away, because no way are you going to have the solution to it straight away, and no way are you going to be able to know at least how to solve it straight away. Perhaps you will, but it's unlikely that you will. But the best thing, if they ask you a problem, is maybe take a few seconds to digest it and think about what exactly it is they're asking you. But then just start telling them some ideas you have about the problem. They could be completely wrong. If they say solve this differential equation, you might think if you ask me to solve a particular differential equation, I'll go, well, okay, how can I solve differential equations? I could use a transformation. I could use an integrating factor method. Is it separable? I probably would do those in a different order and ask those questions to myself. But that's what you want to tell the interviewers you're thinking, because that way they get an insight into how you think as a mathematician, and that's kind of what the interview is about, for them to see how you work, and are you kind of having the intuitive thoughts that you should be as a mathematician. So the key thing is to think out loud. You certainly won't have the answer straight away, and what you might sort of be thinking might be wrong, but they don't really care too much about you getting the right answer in the end. They more kind of care about the journey you take to get there, because if you take a direct path to the correct solution, they'll probably think you've seen the problem before, and then they'll kind of be a bit like, well, why didn't you say 5 minutes ago that you saw this problem before? You just wasted 5 minutes of our time. We haven't learned anything about you as a mathematician or anything like that. So if they do propose you with a problem which you've seen before, just do let them know. They'll have a backup question ready, but it's probably not in your interest to just pretend as if you haven't seen it before and then act as if you're doing all this great maths on the spot, because they'll be able to detect it, and it won't leave a great taste in their mouths. So if you have seen a problem before that they show you, just say, yeah, sorry, I've seen this before. I can still answer it if you want to, but if you have a backup problem or something, I'm happy to answer that as well. So they more care about the journey you take to get to that solution. And what's really cool is if you start off going in the wrong direction, is they'll prod you in the right direction, and they want to see then how you adapt. So if you first think, I should solve it using this method, or maybe think about this thing in maths or this concept, and they go, maybe not, maybe have a think about this. Or sometimes they might actually let you toy around with the wrong idea, because perhaps there's something, some cool maths you can extrapolate from that. Or perhaps if you explore in the wrong area for long enough, you'll then realise, oh wait, this is the wrong area. I shouldn't be thinking about it like this. I should be thinking about it like this. And if you can make that sort of self-discovery, they'll, hopefully be quite impressed. And things like that. They kind of just want to see how you think on the spot, because at the end of the day, the big difference between A-level and uni maths is A-level maths is kind of straightforward and kind of repetitive. A-level maths exams, they're almost always the same questions every year with different numbers, different wording, that sort of stuff. But the maths is mostly the same. If you do enough past papers, you'll get, almost full marks on an A-level exam. Whereas maths at uni, that's definitely not the case. So they want to see how you can adapt to being told you're wrong, or being told that perhaps you're thinking the wrong way, or just adapt to different ways of thinking about a particular problem. Okay, so in an interview, almost any area of maths could crop up as a potential interview question or as a basis for an interview problem. So, for example, one of mine, I had a graph theory-esque problem come up, and that kind of took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting graph theory to come up, especially as I hadn't really been formally taught much graph theory. But it did come up, and of course they kind of expected a lot of the applicants not to know much about graph theory, and I didn't. But they worked off that, and that's again what they're kind of trying to see is how creative you are, how good you are at thinking on the spot. But moral of the story is, you can't prepare for absolutely every possible question, but do perhaps have a taste of different areas of maths just so you're comfortable. If you haven't done any probability before, that's likely to come up. Excuse the pun, but that's likely to come up. Or mechanics didn't come up for me, doesn't come up for a lot, because they know people have varying, depending on where you are from the world. Some schools teach it, some don't. and at different levels. But yeah, I'd say just make sure you have dipped your toe in a bunch of areas of maths, and yeah, pure maths will certainly come up in a maths interview. And if you're applying not for maths but perhaps a science, certainly like graph sketching or analyzing data, things like that, that will almost certainly come up. So just be prepared for, I guess, maths from across the board to come up, because you never really know with interview problems, and it's of course best to be prepared for anything. Okay, so that's kind of a basic overview of the whole interview process for a maths interview at Oxford. Let's just quickly go over it. You'll go in, they'll ask you, a non-maths related problem, or not even a problem, just a question saying, how's your day been? How was your journey here? Something like that. They don't care about the answer. Then you'll get stuck into the actual maths. Interviewer 1 will ask you a problem for around half the interview, so around 15 minutes. Interviewer 2 will take notes, and then they'll switch places halfway through. And each problem will kind of have a part A in inverted commas, and that's kind of the straightforward in inverted commas part of the problem, something that in theory you could ask an A-level student and they should be able to answer. But then the later part of the problem, part B, part C, etc., will be a lot more juicy and a lot more meaty, and will be something you probably haven't seen before maths wise, but it will use that thing that you did in part A, or the thought process in part A, to help you answer. Now, what's the best way you can prepare for an interview? Because this is all good and well me talking at a camera about my experience and how an interview works, but you can probably find most of that online. But what is the best way you can personally prepare for an interview? In my opinion, it is just to do maths, or obviously whatever subject you're applying for, but do a lot of it, especially in the lead up to the interview. So make sure you know your core content. So don't neglect your A-level maths. Despite them not asking you A-level maths questions in the interview, you need to know how to differentiate. Can you differentiate? Do you know the product rule? Do you know the chain rule? Do you know it so much so that you do it without even thinking about it? Do you know the quotient rule? Integration, do you know how to integrate? Do you know how to do U-subs? Do you know how to do integration by parts, etc., etc.? Make sure you know all your core maths, and if you don't, just crash course, just go, put your head down, do the exercises, work through the textbook, plow through, because I promise you, you're going to regret it if it comes to the interview and they ask you to integrate something which in theory is really basic, but you neglected spending the hour learning how to do integration by parts. That being said, at least when I was doing my interviews, we hadn't actually learned a lot of the tough integration stuff, because that came in sort of the second half of year 13, the final year, so after the December of the interview. But I'd really recommend you just get the textbook and learn it yourself before the interview, because if something like that comes up, because other students would have learnt it, it's just going to look like you haven't you don't care as much about maths as perhaps you claim to have done, because if you cared and really enjoyed maths, you probably would have learnt it in your own time anyway. So just make sure you know all the basics and all the things that you probably, at least core maths wise, that you should know by the end of the year. But the best way to prepare is to do maths, so your core maths, but also to do problems, so like step problems and map problems. That's a good starting point. And then perhaps if you want to stretch on and look at Putnam problems, those are going to be a bit more challenging, and maybe like AIME problems, things like that. Any problems you can really get your hands on, and firstly solving them, but also when you're solving them, provided you're not in a public library or something like that, perhaps talking your way through the solution, because up until you're 16, 17, you've been writing maths in your textbook. You don't really talk too much about it. You don't know, or it can be difficult and nervous to talk about maths, or even talk to other people, especially strangers. People who are interviewing you as well will be nervous for a lot of people, myself included. So perhaps get used to talking about maths, because maths should hopefully be something you're comfortable talking about. So perhaps if you have someone else who's applying to do maths or something similar, or get a teacher who knows a lot about maths, or perhaps even someone who knows nothing about maths, who just wants to hear you talk about maths. But yeah, look at a problem, find a problem, and just talk your way through the solution whilst you solve it. And ideally it's a problem which you haven't seen before, because then you're seeing it afresh, and you're not just going to know the solution and be talking about it. You're going to be thinking on the spot and talking, and that's essentially what you're going to be doing in an interview, thinking and talking. So that's a really good way to prepare. Get one of your teachers, if you have a maths teacher, who'd be willing to help, to do a mock interview with them, and if they don't have any sources of problems, hopefully they can find some. But a great way to do it is just take a step paper and take a problem, and that's all already split into like part A, part B, part C, part D, something like that. And they can walk through it and get them to read the solutions ahead of time, so they can prod you in the right direction. Essentially just be a really good mock interviewer. That's one of the best ways, and probably the only really good way you can prepare for an Oxbridge maths interview. The final thing I think I want to mention is what happens at the end of the interview. So they've asked you both your maths problems. What happens after that? Because you don't just like get up and leave. What will generally happen is, they'll say like, oh, well done, you're done, you answered the last problem correctly, or sorry, we've run out of time, but this is how you would do it if you run out of time with the second problem. But then generally they will ask you, do you have any questions? Now this is an absolutely excellent opportunity for you to take advantage and show off to them. So I recommend you have some questions, or a question, maybe two questions that you have in advance prepared. And this is a way for you to show off. So you're not asking them, do you know the directions to the loos, or even worse in some cases, just saying, no, I don't have any questions for you. I'd really recommend you prepare something to ask them, something short, something sweet, but it shows you that you care about maths. So in one of mine, I simply asked, what is it like to do the history of maths module? Because I looked up, you could do a history of maths module in third year at Oxford, and that seemed really interesting to me at the time, because I, watching loads of videos, number file videos and stuff about Euler and things like that. So it seemed pretty cool to me, and that exemplifies to the interviewers that not only do you really find maths fun, and so much so that you're asking questions about it, but it shows that you've researched the course, you've looked online about what it's like to do maths at Oxford and things like that. So it really does show to them that you care. And also, they say first impressions count, but final impressions count just as well. So it's a great way for you to make a final impression. So if you've got n interviews, perhaps have n or n plus a small number, n plus epsilon questions ready to ask the interviewers, just in case they do ask, and they probably 99% of the time they will ask, do you have any questions at the end? But of course, don't ask them, how do you prove Fermat's last theorem or solve the Riemann hypothesis? There's not enough time for that. The margin of time is too narrow. There's a joke in there somewhere. Anyway, to ask them something which is really short, really sweet, that shows you that you really care and you really enjoy maths, and shows them that you've researched and spent the time in looking up maths. Okay, so that's kind of it. That's what I wanted to talk about, the interviews at Oxford for maths. And as I said at the start, a lot of this will apply for Cambridge and other subjects as well. As I'm normally used to, there's a whiteboard in the background, and it's me doing maths on that whiteboard. So I'm not used to this setting, so I apologise if I've just been rambling on a bit. Let me know how I did in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, where I talk about interviews at Oxford, or maths at Oxford, or maybe other things to do with applications or maths, I don't know, other things that aren't just me with a whiteboard, I'd certainly consider it. And if you guys enjoy it, the video I did a month ago, which I talk about maths at Oxford, got loads of views and loads of likes. Again, link for that in the description below. So it seems as if people really do enjoy this content. So perhaps I'll make more of it in the future. Anyway, if you are applying to Oxford or Cambridge to do whatever, or even if you're not applying to Oxbridge and applying elsewhere, best of luck. Let me know how it goes on. Let me know how it goes in the comments down below. And if you get to the interview stage, congratulations. Getting that far is already an achievement in itself. And if you don't get a place, commiserations, but that hopefully is for the best. If you don't get a place, it probably just means that Oxford/Cambridge is not for you. And wherever you end up, you're going to enjoy your uni experience, and you're going to kind of go, yeah, I'm very happy wherever you end up. Thanks for watching. If you do enjoy maths and you've clicked on this video because you're applying to do maths or applying to do science, C subject or something like that, please do subscribe, because over the, I don't know, maybe next 2 videos, but hopefully before interviews come up in 2021, I'm going to be making loads and loads of videos in which I talk about interview style questions. Obviously in this video I just talked about like a general what it's like to do an interview, but obviously a maths interview and a science interview, there'll be a focus on maths. At least, obviously if you're applying to do maths, there'll be a focus on maths, but if you're applying to do, say, engineering, there'll be probably a maths dedicated interview. Or if you're applying to do physics or even biology or chemistry or something like that, there'll be an interview dedicated towards maths. And over the I'm not sure how long, but probably for always in the future, I'm just going to be making a bunch of interview style questions in which I ask you guys some interview style questions and then solve them how they kind of expected to solve them. So not just solve them, but talk my way through them as if I were actually being interviewed. Anyway, I am waffling now. A big thank you to you for watching, and yeah, please do subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. Give it a like as well, and that's all for now. I'll catch you in the next one. Have a great day.